Hi, I'm Alan Fryer, and this is another Northumberland History Snapshot. Scots fleet in Blyth Harbour. 8 o'clock last night news came hither, believed to be true and certain, that an army of Scots is coming to Northumberland to Blyth Neuk of about 12,000 men. The above sensational bulletin was published in London on July the 3rd, 1644, as civil war raged throughout the country. Only 9 years after the Dutch invasion, the peaceful life of the little port of Blyth had again been rudely disturbed. So wrote the Blyth News in a publication of 1957. The background to this story is that in 1644, England was in the midst of a civil war that had started in 1642. It was principally between parliamentarians and royalists over the manner of England's government. Blyth was a small fishing village of about a dozen fishermen's cottages and a few farmsteads in the hinterland, including the small mansion house of the Cramlingtons. A few years previous, they'd been subject to a Spanish privateer landing in the harbour and the troops overrunning the countryside, terrifying the inhabitants for a while. Northumberland was a stronghold of Catholicism. Many Catholic gentry families lived in the area, including the Derwentwater and Erringtons along the Tyne towards Hexham. They were later to take a leading part in the 1715 rising to place a Stuart once again on the throne of Great Britain. The outcome was the parliamentarians were victorious and Charles I was beheaded. In simplistic terms, the royalists had a tolerance towards Catholics, but parliamentarians were seeking to consolidate the Protestant ascendancy. Charles I had tried to introduce the English Book of Common Prayer to Scotland. The Scots rebelled, and when Charles's forces were in the north, the Scots defeated them and captured Newcastle. This is cutting a long and much more complicated story very short though. But to continue from the Blyth News publication, at that time the Scots anti-papist army held the whole of Northumberland and was besieging royalist Newcastle. They were led by Sir David Leslie, that old little crooked soldier, veteran of the Reformation wars in Europe. The Scottish fleet probably arrived in early June. It brought cannons and supplies as well as reinforcements for the army, which earlier had marched south from the border to fight when Parliament's authority had been challenged by the Roman Catholic King Charles I. With his reinforcements from the fleet, Leslie left the walls of Newcastle and marched south to York. There, on July the 2nd, the day on which the news of the landing at Blyth reached London, he fought with the Roundheads against Charles I's troops at Marston Moor. After their victory, he returned to Newcastle. But if the Scottish landing was the major event at Blyth Neuk during the Civil War, it was by no means the only one. Long before that, the war had brought increased prosperity to the port. The villagers of Blyth and Newsham had also been giving a taste of the bitterness of the struggle, and even after the hostilities had ended, there were repercussions from it in the area. In 1642, the first year of the war, Parliament ordered that neither coal nor salt should be brought from royalist Newcastle. Blyth was also included in the order. This, however, made fuel so scarce in London that some time later the law was partially repealed. Free trade was permitted with Blyth, bringing greater activity in Blyth Harbour and more prosperity to the village. The benefit was largely wiped out during Cromwell's government after the war and under Charles II's rule by the improvements made to its rival port Hartley, or as it's now known, Seaton Sluice. Sir Ralph Delaval, who had supported Parliament and married David Leslie's daughter, built a new pier to shelter the harbour mouth there. Others, made of stone and cement, having proved useless against the rough sea, he bound every joint with dovetails of heart of oak let into the stone. To combat the silting in the harbour, he built sluice gates to hold back water, which, when suddenly released, scoured the channel clean. Protected by a battery of guns, the port took away much of Blyth's trade in salt and coal, and was the busier harbour for many years. Blyth's first direct experience of the struggle, which had torn the country in two, occurred during the early part of the war's second year. Robert Cramlington of Newsham, who had figured so prominently in the Dutch episode in 1635, was a Roman Catholic and loyal to Charles I. On May the 24th, 1643, this information was carried secretly to a parliamentary frigate, the Antelope, which was anchored near Tynemouth Castle. A man on board the vessel wrote an account of what happened on that occasion. That night we had a well-wisher who stole off in a boat and gave us intelligence of a great papist that lived north from the castle, within half a mile of the shore. The house I knew well, and the owner thereof, one Mr. Cramlington of Newsham, who had made ready half a dozen horses and men to go to the Earl of Newcastle's army. Whereupon I animated the captain to prevent his going, and likewise I undertook to be their guide. So about 12 o'clock at night we armed 80 men well provided, whom we landed on the shore, and thence marched up in order unto the house. Placing our sentinels round about it, we repaired first to the stable, thinking to make all sure there, but we found not only all the horses gone, but the gentleman himself the day before. After some opposition we entered the house, but found no ammunition at all therein, whereupon our soldiers plundered it, and so returned on shipboard. Cramlington, his wife, and his daughter all died within the first 3 months of 1650. 2 years later, his estate at Newsham was seized by Cromwell's government because of his treason. 10 years afterwards, Philip Cramlington regained possession of the estate on the restoration of Charles II. It remained in the family until the end of the century. The size of the force which was landed to attack Robert Cramlington's house gives some idea of the sympathies of the Blyth district during the war. Roman Catholicism seems to have been strong about Blyth and Newsham, where a chapel was for many years attached to the manor. Ursden, 7 miles away, was the Protestant church, and seems to have been, more often than not, without an incumbent. After the Civil War, an Oliverian survey, a commission to investigate the provisions for religious instruction, was made of Northumberland. At Morpeth, on June the 1st, 1650, the case of Blyth was considered by William Fenwick, Ralph Delaval, William Shafto, Henry Ogle, John Hall, and Luke Killingworth. They advised the inclusion of Blyth Neuk and Newsham into a new parish of Horton. The latter was then a chapelry in the parish of Woodhorn. This arrangement in fact did not materialise, and Blyth and Newsham remained in Ursden parish.